Yeah, nobody. I just wondered what all those people who went down to the Rogers Stadium to watch it on the big screen. I think they paid $15 or something like that to watch it. I wondered what they all did at three o'clock in the morning to get home. Okay, so given that there is a big let me turn the chat on here. Big Jays fan, but I'm still here. Okay, that's good. Well, for the Blue Jays fans tonight, I'm going to try and plow through this material on the quicker side, so that we can watch shortly after it starts. A couple people, just a little business first. A couple people have written asking about the media evaluation exercise, asking where the portal went. The portal disappeared. Okay, there was a due date. I put in the syllabus that there are no extensions. The exercise has been there since the very first day of classes. So if you missed it or if you forgot it, make sure to get the second one in. Okay, it's not going to be a huge deal with respect to your mark, but remember that it is 5 percentage points. So it's certainly in your best interest to, if you've got a little bit of free time, to get that. The submission portal has been open for both exercises since the first class. Good idea to get it out of your way, especially when the end of term rolls around and you got papers to do and other stuff. Yeah, Michael, hi.
I just had a couple of questions. First one's about the media evaluation. I figure it's going to take a lot of time, especially since this time of year for TAs to be marking it. But I was just wondering, is it like more so towards the end of the end of the semester
Okay.
where you figure we'll get it?
Okay, well, there are like 200 of them to be graded, but
Hmm.
I asked them really politely if they could shoot for 2 weeks.
Okay.
Okay, and they said that they would try. So I have a feeling, knowing our very highly conscientious TAs, that you'll probably have a grade within 2 weeks. And then the second one is due on the very last day of classes. So you probably won't get feedback you'll get your results from the final exam before you get feedback on that. Okay, fair enough. I thought 2 weeks was a fair request. Um, and I suspect that they'll meet that request.
Okay. I just had one other question. I think it was about a week ago. I was looking at I went on the Yorkview websites and they have exam dates posted there for final exams. I was just wondering, is that
Oh,
like
it came out
represented?
today. It came out today. I just got, if you look, you should be able to see it. I got a note from the department saying the final exam schedule has been posted.
Okay.
Do you want to do a quick check and then maybe we'll announce it at the break? But everybody should
Yeah,
have
sure.
access. Okay, actually, you know what? I don't like to announce it because if I make a mistake or as another student in the class makes a mistake, then they blame me if they don't show up at the right time. Everybody here, I'll post the link for the exam schedule, and everybody's responsible for looking up when, and I don't think they've listed the locations yet. I think I remember in the email saying the date and time has been set. Oh, I'm looking here at the chat. Um, Thursday, December 18th at wait a minute, at 2 o'clock. They're supposed to give us a night one. You sure that's us, Ruth? Okay, I'll post the link and then we can all take a look later on. But no location has been announced. And our test two will once again be in wherever it was before. Where was it before? In what's the name of that building? Mm, is it Lusande? Okay, I'll post that too. But test two is in the same room that test one was at. Okay. Um, all right. So I want to today continue in our discussion of the trait approaches to personality, and we'll focus on two models tonight. I'll spend the first half of the lecture talking about Hans Eysenck, very, very influential scholar in the discipline in personality psychology. In particular, I'll give you some really bad news about him at the end of the lecture. And then after the break, I'll provide some, let's say, critical commentary on the big five, okay? Because it is covered exhaustively in your textbook. We said last week that one popular way to conceptualize personality is as consisting of a set of basic characteristics that are stable over time and that are stable across situations. And these traits can be seen as, and they very frequently are seen as internal properties of the person. Okay? Internal properties that have a causal nature. Little Johnny destroyed the toys in the playroom because little Johnny is aggressive or destructive. Okay? So a lot of trait theorists regard traits as inherent dispositions in people. Other ones are more conservative and see traits as mere descriptors of a person's enduring features and behaviors. And we poked some holes into the some of the logical problems, all right, in our discussion of Skinner's criticism last week, and that we always have to be mindful of the danger of confusing description with explanation. I also told you that there's a very long history in personality psychology that has tried to correlational research that has tried to link psychological types and traits and behaviors with certain features in the body. And I argue to you that in many ways, what we do right now is very much in keeping with what was being done 100 years ago. We laughed or we giggled when we looked at the personality theories of the ancient Greeks and the somatotype theories. But in many ways, it's exactly what we do now when we stick someone's head in a fMRI machine, throw tasks at them or put them in situations or give them perceptual stimuli to look at, and then look at what parts of the brain light up. One of the most comprehensive and certainly one of the most research stimulating theories in trait psychology was put forward by Hans Eysenck. And I want to elaborate. It's not given a ton of press in your textbook, so I'm gonna add to what's in your textbook today. Very, very important in the field of personality psychology for three reasons, really. Number one, his work was unbelievably comprehensive. This was a guy who addressed a very broad range of topics, a very broad range of phenomena. He was interested in so-called normal behavior. He was interested in so-called abnormal behavior. He wrote over 40 books, okay? Started out as a clinical psychologist at the famous Maudsley Hospital in London. He wrote about the causes of neuroses, smoking behavior, anxiety, hysteria. He was one of the first to actively come out and criticize psychoanalysis and the effectiveness of psychoanalysis as a treatment intervention. Not someone who was limited in scope, certainly, or interests. So that's number one. We could call that comprehensive. Number two, like many of the other trait theorists, and that's how you code him in your head, huh? You code him as a trait theorist with a biological orientation. He worked very, very diligently to construct precise measures of his theoretical concepts. We cannot say the same thing about Freud. We cannot say the same thing about the neo-Freudians. Um, his theories were precisely stated, and many of his hypotheses actually lent themselves to empirical testing, okay, to empirical validation. And number three, as it turns out, okay, we're saying this in hindsight now, turns out there's a great deal of empirical support for a lot of his ideas, especially his ideas about differences between introverts and extroverts. His other ideas about precise brain mechanisms that are involved in personality, as your textbook points out, have been harder to test. Let me tell you a little bit about him as a scholar because it's kind of a cool story. He was born and raised in Germany. His parents were big stars in the theater. His grandmother was a doyen of the stage. Um, when he was ready to attend university, 1934, Hitler, of course, had been in power for a year or so. And like all young scholars at that time, imagine living this reality. Like all young scholars at that time, or kids who wanted to go to university, he was told that he could not gain acceptance into the academy, into the university, unless he joined the Nazi Party. So he left. Those were the days where people could still leave Germany. And he landed in London, England, with absolutely zero interest in psychology. Okay. So it's kind of bizarre that one of the most widely cited psychologists, like if you put his name in PsycInfo or in Web of Science, thousands of cited references will show up. One of the most widely cited people in psychology really did not start out with a passion to study psychology. He was really interested in studying subatomic physics, if you can imagine that. But when he got to the University of London in the UK, he was told that there's no more room in the physics department, but if he wanted to study psychology, he could stay there. So he did. All right. Now, if you could take a look at the people who were the faculty who were in the psychology department at that time that he was a student, there were some very eminent people there. I'll put their names in the chat here. There were people like Charles Spearman, Carl Pearson. What you know their names? Why do you know their names? Oh, yes, you do. Spearman, Pearson. Thank you very much. Yes. Oh, am I recording the session? I think I am. Yeah. There's that little dot. Yeah, I am, Alexa. They gave us the correlation coefficients. There was another person cross-appointed to psychology, JBS Haldane. You might know his name if you've ever taken a biology course. Very famous evolutionary biologist. And what that meant for his training, for Eysenck's training, was that he got a very sound background in experimental psychology in a particular tradition. I'll write this in the chat too. He got very sound training in what we now call the British empiricism approach to understanding the world. Okay, that's kind of what most of you are getting at York University. All right, so most people here, I'm guessing, are in second year, and yeah, they give you lots of choices, but they force you to take certain courses. And if you look at what they force you to take, they force you to take the writing course. They force you to take down the road a critical thinking course. But they heap all these stats and methods courses on you as well. And they do that for a particular reason. Okay. You will, by the time you get out of York psychology, you will be well versed in the logic of experimentation, in how to identify experiments, how to actually conduct them, how to interpret them. They invest a lot in undergraduate psychology education so that students have this type of background, not unlike what Eysenck experienced. When he looked at psychology at the time, okay, he said he noticed that there were really two traditions, or two, I'm changing the slide here, two orientations. There was the orientation that he was living in, where there was a focus on, gathering empirical evidence, conducting experiments. Okay. Um, if I asked you, if I gave you a stack of articles and said, okay, put the experiments in one pile and put everything else, like everything that's not an experiment, in another pile, you would know how to do that, correct? How would you do that? I give you a bunch of printed articles from psychology journals. And I say, put the experiments over here and put the non-experiments over there. How would you do that? Hmm. You would compare them, yes, Michael, on what dimension? Okay, let me say this differently. What's the hallmark feature of the experiment, at least as it's been taught to you so
Random
far?
assignment.
Well, random assignment is good. I can't follow these. Thank you, Stephanie. You look for manipulated variables. Yeah. So you go out there in the world, you observe things. Most of what everybody said was right. You observe things, you notice patterns. You say, I think that this causes this. Every time I see this, I observe that immediately after. You bring the phenomenon into your laboratory where you have control, okay? And you, the experimenter, manipulates it, at least one variable. What do we call that variable, folks? Just a refresher here. What variable is that? The one that is manipulated. What do we call that variable? Thank you, the independent variable. Yeah. You hold everything else constant. You do your best. Yeah. And then you observe the effect of that manipulation on levels of the dependent variable. I do this to X, it has this effect on Y. Okay? That's our preferred way of doing research. We love that it's our preferred method because at the end of the day, if you do it right, it allows you to say something about what? What's the upside to experimentation? Thank
Off.
Okay, great. It allows you to say something about cause and effect. Again, I do this to X, it has this effect on Y. And he noticed in his department and elsewhere that experimental psychologists had very little concern for individual differences. So you look out in the real world, people vary. Yeah. Some kids are good at school, some people are shy, some are outgoing, some people are big risk takers. There's variation. And the experimentalists were not typically interested in individual variation. And that is still largely true today. Okay, we have some of the finest experimental psychologists on the planet right here at York. You can go to the Center for Vision Research. It's under the roof of psychology, and you will encounter brilliant vision researchers who perform amazing experiments and have millions and millions of dollars in grant money. And if you say to them over beer or at a party, if you ask them a question like, hmm, are there any differences between males and females in our ability to perceive depth? Okay. They'll look at you like you're out of your mind. They're like, well, we're not interested in individual variation. Okay, we're working with the visual system. It's wired in pretty much the same way in all people. We have different questions. They're interested in variation, not across people, but across treatment conditions. Yeah. And of course, they can control that variation in the context of experimentation. But we have other kinds of psychologists in our department, lots of them. I would put the personality psychologists in this group. I'd put the developmental psychologists in this group, many of the clinicians, and so on, who weren't at the time that Eysenck was working concerned necessarily with an emphasis on establishing cause and effect. Okay, they were turned on by other stuff. Okay, so they would go out into the world and they'd observe variation and they'd go, oh, that's interesting. How do relationships between variables exist in nature? All right. They ask questions. You can go to our department right now. They ask questions like, are there differences between males and females in spatial ability? Are there differences between 5-year-olds, 10-year-olds, 15-year-olds in moral reasoning ability? Questions like that. Okay. You can't manipulate variables. Okay. And they're not interested in the manipulation of variables. They're interested in variation as it exists in nature. And those two traditions, the correlational approach and the experimental approach, have pretty much evolved independently from one another. Maybe not as much the case today as was the case when Eysenck made this observation, but it is still largely the case. And Eysenck, this disturbed Eysenck, and he was really one of the first to suggest that the two approaches be integrated. Okay, he said there's value in putting the correlational and the experimental traditions together. And not only did he suggest that it was a good idea, he gave us a recipe or a prescription on how to do it. Okay, he said, so the first thing to do in personality psychology that needs to be done is the main dimensions of personality must be identified. And remember, he was someone who thought of behavior as being best described by these things that are called traits. He said after you identify those main dimensions, then you have to devise a measurement technique. You have to devise a means of measuring the traits that's based on sound scientific and statistical procedures. And then once you've accomplished 1 and 2 on the slide here, then you can link them up with experimental procedures. Okay, so you have a way to identify people on different parts of a distribution. Then you can bring them into the lab and get them to do things, okay, and see how they behave differently or react differently or think differently or feel differently and so on. So we can see his work as maybe the beginning of a scientific, and we'll put that in quotation marks, the beginnings of a real scientific personality psychology. Let's look at his definition here because I want to make a few points in connection with this. So for Isaac, personality is a more or less stable and enduring organization of a person's character, temperament, intellect, and physique, which determines their unique adjustment to the environment. There are some words in there that we don't use nowadays, and let me just highlight them. When he used the term character, he was referring to a system of, or yeah, system of, I'll put it in the chat here, conative behavior. Okay, the mental faculty of purpose, willful behavior. All right, so specific meaning there. When he used the term temperament, he was referring to what we would now call emotional or affective behavior. Intellect, we would refer to that now as cognitive behavior. And when he used the term physique, he wasn't like thinking about body shape. He was making the point that traits are grounded in the body, that they're grounded in biology. And he actually said that all traits are genetically determined, which is bizarre because he did his work before the behavior geneticists came along and confirmed many of his ideas, but he strongly suspected that there was a genetic basis to many of the traits that he later identified. Okay. Another point here I want to make, which is not in your textbook, but really no discussion of Isaac is complete without pointing this out. He said that before we can call something a trait, it has to meet certain criteria. Okay, so I said last week that one characteristic of the trait approach is that it had a very strong psychometric and psychometric approach. Okay, a focus on measurement, and he wholeheartedly believed in measurement, but he also realized that measurement is not enough. Okay, sometimes you measure things and you get these sterile, maybe even meaningless dimensions. He argued very forcefully that personality psychology, trait psychology, has to ground their ideas in biology. Okay, so that was his warning. These four criteria must be met. Okay, so you have to meet the psychometric criterion. You have to be able to provide statistical, quantitative evidence for a trait or a factor's existence. Okay, so if you identify X as a trait, you have to be able to show it once. You have to be able to replicate it. You have to be able to show that that is also obtained in other samples. Okay, so that's his focus on measurement. I'm not going to say too much about number 2 because I'm going to spend a whole lecture on this next week. But a second criterion he laid out was the idea that factors must also possess heritability. Okay, they must fit an established genetic model. I'm going to spend a lot of time on the concept of heritability next week. But according to him, you have to show that that traits have a genetic basis. The third factor or criterion that must be met is that the traits must make sense from a theoretical point of view. Okay, when you think of Isaac, you think of him as the poster boy for the deductive method. Okay, you start with theory, you gather data that are logically consistent with the theory. That is highly prized and rewarded in science. Okay, so they have to make sense from a theoretical standpoint. And they must also, I'm going to describe number four, and then I'm going to ask you what you think about this idea. To call something a trait, you have to be able to show that it possesses what he called social relevance. Okay, it has to be relevant to the group or population of individuals that you are studying. What do you think of that idea? What do you think about the idea that scientists, personality psychologists, should consider the social relevance of their research before they do anything? Because this could not, this is a big part of your world right now, whether you're aware of it or not. Yeah, Michael.
I feel like it's definitely relevant if you're studying things like psychology and personality psychology and even sociology, because if you can't establish if it's relevant or not, then I feel like there are certain measures that you wouldn't, er, I feel like it wouldn't really be able to apply to the real world. And if it can't be applied to the real world, how can you kind of measure external validity?
Okay, so Michael's position, if I can sum it up, and don't go away, Mia, because getting to you, is that it's a good idea to have social relevance police in the university environment to make decisions about what we should allow professors and graduate students to study or not. Because if something doesn't have an application to the group, then it may not be worth it. It may not be worth investing money in them, and may not be worth employing them at all. Did that summarize your position?
Kind of, yeah.
Kind of. Okay, Mia. Yeah. Do you have something to say? I'm just trying to.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
do get where he's coming from since a lot of with like a lot of personality traits in general refer to how a person interacts socially with other people, like if they're introverted or they're shy or they're outgoing and like I guess you have to put to be able to even like use like personality, you kind of have to do it as opposed to other people's personalities.
Okay.
And but I also think that it doesn't necessarily need to have it. Um like I think there's a lot of things that if we like that we have researched that could be helpful that we just that if we just said, oh, well, it's probably not going to end up doing anything. Like it's probably not going to end up with anything useful.
Okay.
It's still useful to know that this doesn't have any use, you
As
know?
as knowledge.
Yeah.
Okay, as a body of knowledge. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of people agreeing with this idea. All right, so everybody was taught in statistics the distinction between basic and applied research. Okay? The whole idea of the university historically was to get smart people, in there following their passions, following what interests them, and then hopefully one or two or three would find something of great importance. Okay, that was the initial setup. But now, when you look at how decisions are made about who to employ, how to spend money, how to allocate funds, we make the distinction between basic research, people who are studying their own thing on their own timeline, and applied research. Okay, applied research is when people in industry give you money, all right, with a particular um, uh, research agenda in mind. So if you walk through the University of Toronto campus now, every building, I think this is largely true at York as well, every building has a name on it, a corporation's name, yeah? And you might ask yourself, well, why, you know, why are there company names on the buildings that used to just be called the sociology building or the law building, or that's all gone. Everything has a name on it. And that name is the name of the donor. So as soon as the university gets in the sack with industry, okay, industry can guide research. We'll give you $5 million. Try to identify the gene that is responsible for schizophrenia or breast cancer or whatever. Okay. That's applied research. But when you look at the history of discoveries in science, most of them don't come from, and this relates to, I think, Mia's part two hesitation in what she said. Most discoveries do not happen as a result of people going out to find something in particular. Okay? They happen serendipitously. When you look, for example, at the history of psychiatric drugs, okay, when you look at the first generation of antidepressants, that they weren't developed as a result of people getting money to make drugs to help depressed people feel better. They came, that generation of antidepressants came from observations that were made in clinical trials of tuberculosis drugs. Okay. So they had clinical trials giving people with tuberculosis a drug called isoniazid, which you still get if you get tuberculosis now. And they noticed that, yeah, it cleans up the bacilli in people's lungs, but it also has mood elevating properties. Okay. Things in science discoveries tend to be serendipitous. I don't know if you guys watch Steve Paikin. Does anybody watch Steve Paikin at 11 o'clock at night? Okay, if you don't watch Steve Paikin, what are you watching at 11 o'clock at night? Anyhow, John Polanyi was on the other night. And you can probably find this interview. John Polanyi, a person to be very proud of here in the city of Toronto because he won a Nobel Peace Prize in physics. He articulated very nicely that when you start out on a research endeavor, rarely do you know where it's going to take you. Okay, so when you've got these people who are policing what people should study, what's meaningful. I mean, what's meaningful to you may not be what's socially relevant to somebody else. People making decisions about what should and shouldn't be studied, it can really choke off a lot of creativity. And now, of course, in your world, things are being policed very heavily. Okay, you can't submit a manuscript to most of the major APA journals saying that you're looking at sex differences. Okay, because the whole idea of sex being binary, at least in the behavioral sciences, has been pretty much shut down. Okay, so they're not looking at papers that look at sex differences. There are all kinds of sanctions in place. Don't know if you're aware of this, where there are thought police out there making decisions about what people should and shouldn't do. I would suggest to you, I'm guessing if you were born and raised here, then you may not appreciate what academic freedom is all about. But it should be it's something that you should hold dear, okay? Because not everywhere on the planet can you take the courses that you're taking at York. Can you have access to literature that you have here at York? Um, when police states take over, they very, very frequently cut off access to certain bodies of knowledge. It's something that you should value. Okay, commentary on social relevance. All right, so I want you to remember now his prescription. Yeah. He said the first thing to do to put personality psychology on the map is to identify the main dimensions or features of personality. And the way he did it is the way a lot of the trait psychologists did it. He used a statistical procedure known as factor analysis. Okay. Now, it's a factor analysis. I would say it's really difficult to grasp until you do one on your own, okay, on your own data. But conceptually, the way to think about it is as like a 3D correlation matrix. Okay, so everybody is either doing stats or has done stats now. You know what a correlation coefficient is. You got an x-axis and a y-axis, and you look at the relationships between variables on one plane. A factor analysis allows you to look at relationships between variables in three-dimensional space. So think of your x and y axis, and then put a depth axis through that. It gives you a set of intercorrelations between a large set of measurements, okay, or responses that allow you to make inferences about maybe underlying structures. It tells you which items on a questionnaire, for example, co-vary with one another. This is a statistical approach to identifying traits that starts with a pool of items. Those items can be words, they can be questions on a questionnaire, they can be behaviors, and so on. And then these are the things, it tells you how they relate to one another. And then you, the researcher, have to figure it out. And I'll just give you a brief description of one that I'm doing right now, okay, to give you a sense of how it works. So, doing some research on the sense of smell, the importance of the sense of smell in everyday life, okay, with a U of T researcher. We had a whole design in mind. We're going to bring people into the lab. We're going to expose them to certain odors while they're reading certain literary passages. Okay, we wanted to do that. And we said, first, we need some kind of measure of the importance of odors to people. We assumed that there would be one in the literature. We looked in the literature and it didn't exist, which was kind of a bummer because what it meant was we had to make one. Okay, so we ask, or it delays your project. So how do you make a measure? How do you measure people's sensitivity to odors, not in a perceptual sense, but how important odors are to people in everyday life? You sit down over beer, you think of all those places in everyday life where your nose matters, where your smell perceptions matter. Okay? You start generating items for a questionnaire. Are you the person who is are you the person who scents your environment? Do you buy those scented candles? Do you scent your body with artificial scent? Do certain smells evoke emotions in you? Okay. Um, Can you remember smells of people? Are you the person who, when you sit beside someone on the TTC and they're wearing far too much fragrance, do you get up and move? Okay, things like that. Are you the person whose nose is a reliable instrument to detect danger? Okay, I can smell smoke before my partner can smell smoke. I'm good at telling whether food has gone off using my sense of smell. So you sit down, and this takes hours and hours and hours, and you start generating questions that you think are important in assessing people's um, how people regard odors in in everyday life. You put them in a questionnaire. You give them to hundreds of people. Okay, you make your questionnaire better. Now you have a questionnaire with 150 items. You go into classrooms, you give it to students. You take their data and you put them in this statistical software package called a factor analysis. And what the factor analysis does, okay, is it shows you how all of the items on your questionnaire relate to all of the other items on the questionnaire for all of for the hundreds and hundreds of students that you gave it to. It doesn't tell you how to make sense of them. All right, it spits out these numbers right here if you're looking at the slide. But from these numbers, you can deduce, okay, what's going on with certain items in your questionnaire. And then you, the researcher, gives them labels. So these are the labels we gave them, okay, to understand odors. It identified 5 factors in our questionnaire, and these are the labels that we give to them. So it doesn't do the hard work for you, but it's a fantastic technique that allows you to reduce a very large set of numbers and looks at the relationships between those numbers. Okay? I don't know if that was helpful for you. So that's a factor analysis. That's what it looks like. Eysenck collected data from subject populations all over the world. And when he first presented his model, it looked like this. Okay? He said that there are 2 main factors. There's a introversion, extroversion factor, and then there's a neuroticism stability factor. He was the consummate, scientist. He kept collecting data, and then in the late 1970s, he added another personality dimension based on his factor analytic findings that he called psychoticism. Okay. So this was his final model of personality, also presented in your textbook. Let me say a couple of things about this. I'm just looking at your at your comment, Yasmin. Isn't the entrance to graduate school kind of picking the same people with the same strict criteria? Can't be. Oh, no doubt, no doubt. Okay. Let me make a few commentaries on this. First of all, you look at this, you say, well, Eysenck gave us a typology. Okay, he gave us a typology that's hierarchically organized. When you look at the colored boxes on the top of each rectangle, those are what he called super traits. They are the most abstract. Okay, those super traits, extroversion, neuroticism, and psychoticism, are based on a set of intercorrelations. Okay, we're quantitative now, numbers, intercorrelations between various traits. So the things in the boxes are the traits. These are the super traits. In the white boxes, we have the traits. And what you can't see here, if we could keep going, is that the traits are in turn inferred from a set of intercorrelations between actual behaviors and responses. So you can ask people like questions like, do you like to go to parties? Would you rather hang out by yourself? Do you worry too much? Things like that. Okay. You look at their responses. Those responses combine to form traits, and then traits combine to form these super traits. All right. So for Eysenck, behavior is best described in terms of traits that characterize people in varying degrees. Okay, we see a hierarchy here. This is what I would put in your notes. You see a hierarchy here of behavioral organization. So let's look at some of the features here, okay? Look at the traits that make up extroversion. Extroverts are sociable, impulsive, they like excitement, they crave excitement, they're oriented towards external reality. They're the people who take chances, they're riskier, they're more risk prone, they prefer to keep moving. Extroverted people tend to be happier people as well, like meaning that they experience more positive emotions. One defining feature of extroversion is the craving for stimulation. Martin Zuckerman gave us the great, I love this concept, notion of stimulus hunger. Okay, they're stimulus hungry. They want more stimulation. This causes them to approach the environment, to make friends, to take risks, to experience more. Okay, so those are all advantages of extroversion. Yeah, they're happier, they have more positive emotions, but of course, there's a downside to this at the extreme end. Being super extroverted can get you into trouble. Okay. Uh, get you into more car accidents, get you into more drinking accidents. Their thrill seeking causes them to engage in more dangerous activities. Okay, where people get hurt. The opposite of extroversion is introversion. Okay, the highly introverted person prefers solitude. They get nervous in large groups. They're way more cautious. They're way more socially reserved. They're planful. Okay, they're organized. They prefer routine. Okay, so you may know a super introverted person, and you know never ever ever plan a surprise birthday party for that person. Okay, not a nice thing to do for an introvert. So introversion extroversion is on a continuum. All right, there are people at the extremes. Extreme introversion and extroversion are at the extremes, and then you've got all these people in the middle. That's a sociability dimension. Look at the neuroticism super trait here and the traits that make that up. Hallmark feature of neuroticism for Eysenck is anxiety, not unlike what Freud said and Freud observed, and usually an anxiety that is disproportionate to the situation at hand. Okay, these are the worriers, these are the moody people, these are the people who are preoccupied with all the things that can go wrong. When they are upset, okay, when something happens to them, they take longer to recalibrate. Okay, they tend to be irritable, they tend to be tense. Neuroticism correlates negatively with physical health. It's bad for you. Okay, it's hard on your body to be neurotic, and it correlates negatively with health seeking behavior. So if you're trying to get a loved one or a patient to follow a routine, let's say post operatively after surgery, then knowing where they are on this personality dimension can be helpful to you, because you know that the chances of them following a protocol, okay, that's in service of healing and recovery is less or is poorer than the probability of a non-neurotic person or a so-called stable person following a protocol. These can be really useful pieces of information to have about a person. If you're a case manager for a highly neurotic person that's just had open heart surgery, then you know as the case manager that you have to stay on top of them. Interpersonally, neurotics have more ups and downs. They tend to be more self-absorbed, more pessimistic, difficulties in interpersonal relationships, and so on. Now, this dimension here, this psychoticism dimension, that he added later, let me say a couple things about that. He wrote a wonder, and if you want the link, I can send it to you. Eysenck wrote an incredible piece where he articulated what he thought to be a link between psychoticism and creative behavior, okay? Artistic geniuses. He points out in the book that throughout history, a lot of geniuses have, in different domains have tended to show various forms of psychoses. So for those of you who've taken abnormal psychology, when you say the word psychotic or psychoticism, what things come to your mind? Yeah, okay, Stephanie, thank you. Perceptual disturbances, thought disturbances, delusions, loss of, thank you, awesome, loss of contact with reality. This is the most severe type of psychopathology, okay, in the sample space of psychopathology. And when you look at the traits, okay, so we're looking down here now, that make up psychoticism, there are unattractive traits, yeah, aggression, egocentrism, lack of empathy, impulsivity. These are not attractive traits, but according to Eysenck, they're traits that are quite conducive to the pursuit of a creative career. Okay? To do well in a creative career, you have to be able to buck tradition. Yeah? You have to be able to strike out on your own. You have to be able to not give a crap what other people say or think about your work. The person who scores high on the psychoticism scale tends to be solitary, tends to be uncaring, lacking in empathy. So they might look to you as if they're loners. They are people who, you may have experienced this in like in a cinema, something bad happens, or in real life, something bad happens. It's witnessed by a bunch of people. You know, dog gets hit by a car, and you'll hear somebody in the crowd giggle or laugh. Okay, they very frequently show inappropriate emotion. The psychoticism scale predicts a whole bunch of really fascinating things. People who are high on the psychoticism scale prefer things like violent cinema. They're bad secret keepers. Okay. They're way more likely to tell your secrets to somebody else, especially your sexual secrets, to other people. They're more likely to endorse promiscuous sexual attitudes. They tend to have more hostile sexual attitudes, and they are definitely much more likely to be in jail. Okay. So it's a predictive of a lot of things. So you step back from this now and you think, okay, again, remembering his prescription, um, he's made good, yeah, on ingredient number one, identifying the major dimensions of personality. This is what he gave us, okay, right on the screen here. Then he said that, if you recall, that it's important to devise a measurement device, okay, that allows you to assess where people are on these dimensions. And he did that, okay? He did that. I can't show it to you, all right? But I have provided on the screen here some sample items from what's called the Eyes-Inc personality inventory. This is a piece of paper. This is a piece of paper with 57 true false items on it. Okay? You give it to people and you ask people to indicate whether that statement is true or false for them. I put an online. There's a mini Eyes-Inc personality test that you can do online. It shows you how to score it and interpret it and everything if you're interested in it. Okay. So what it means now is that with 57 items, you could give the questionnaire to people, get a numerical index of where they fall, sorry, on introversion, neuroticism, and psychoticism, yeah, and then bring them into the laboratory and look at differences between people. This measurement device is still the API and the EPQ, okay, you made two of them, are still widely used. And they're widely used because they have excellent psychometric properties. All right, their reliability indices are good. The validity indices are good. You don't have to take my word for it. You can just look up the psychometric properties of these two measurement devices. They're excellent. So now you've got this thing that you can use, that you can collect data briefly to give you to measure these dimensions in actual people, and look for differences between introverts and extroverts, between neurotic people and stable people. All right, and your textbook outlines some. I mean, there's oodles and oodles of research like this. We know, for example, if you take introverts and extroverts and you squirt lemon juice in their mouths, that introverts generate more saliva than do extroverts. We know that introverts show a stronger reaction to sudden noises. Okay, that they're more susceptible to the disruption of concentration. All right, so think about how you study, for example. Are you the person who has to really go into as quiet a place as you can, okay, to study? And if you hear a drip in the downstairs bathroom faucet, it can mess you up while you're studying. Are you that person? Or are you the person who goes to the library to study in one of those big areas? Okay, you see both these types of students in the library, sits at those big tables where you can watch lots of people, where you can listen to lots of people, put your headphones on while you're studying, and so on. These are if you gave those students the test, the EPQ, they would score, undoubtedly, they would score high on extroversion. We know from these have been very, very useful in all kinds of places within psychology. We know from health psychology that extroverts are more likely to use drugs. They're more likely to use and abuse alcohol. We know from health psychology that extroverts have sex earlier they have sex more frequently, they have more sexual partners, they have sex in a wider range of positions. So if you're counseling teenagers, for example, on sexual practices, then it would be to your advantage to have knowledge about this personality dimension, where they are on the introversion extroversion scale. There's a wonderful genre of research where it's old, but it's fascinating, where researchers would stand outside of art galleries and museums. They'd ask people going into the art galleries, would you mind, filling out this questionnaire and then accompanying us to different pieces of art and telling us what you think about the pieces of art? People would say, yeah, because it takes, 8 minutes to fill out the EPQ. All right, so the researchers have knowledge of where they are, whether their subjects are introverted or extroverted. They take them to strategic paintings, sculptures, okay, whatever it is, and they find that extroverts and introverts have different aesthetic sensibilities. Okay, extroverts like abstract paintings over figurative art. They prefer bolder colors, more saturated hues. Okay, so ask yourself, are you the person who could live in that red bedroom? Okay, there was a few years ago, everybody was painting their painting rooms in their house that really saturated red. Are you someone who would like that? Or are you someone who would go mad if you had to sleep in a red room? They like louder music. They prefer brighter colors. There are all kinds of differences in their aesthetic preferences. Eysenck performed a super interesting group of experiments that looked at pain thresholds in introverted and extroverted subjects. So he brought them in the lab, okay, and subjected them to different levels of electric shock. Okay, what did he measure? He measured the amount of time that they could stand it. How long can they take the shock? And what he found was that the pain tolerance, well, what would you predict there? I've already given away that there's a difference, but who do you think can take pain that's stronger and for longer periods of time? The introvert or the extrovert? Let's see a show here. Extroverts can tolerate much greater pain levels for much longer periods of time. So knowing where someone is on this continuum might be important in certain places. Okay, if you're a pediatric dentist or if you're just a regular dentist, then knowing something about your patient and how they're likely to respond to pain can help you adjust your intervention. If you're a case manager or nurse working in a chronic pain clinic, then having this information about your patient can be super helpful, because not all people react to pain in exactly the same way. He ran I don't think you could do this now. He ran a very interesting set of what he called sensory deprivation studies, where he brought people to the lab. He put them in darkened rooms, darkened soundproof rooms. He put cloth around their periphery to minimize any kind of somatosensory stimulation. And again, measured how long they could stay there. One of the students at Glendon in this lecture said, well, you could do that now using a tranquility tank. And I thought that was kind of an interesting idea. All right, so the dependent measure there was how long could they stay? Who can stay longer in a tranquility tank or sensory deprivation room? Would you guess? Introvert or extrovert? Yes. Okay. Introverts can hang out without any stimulation. They can tolerate that for much greater periods of time, stretches of time than extroverts. Okay. So these ideas generated a staggering amount of research. Okay. Now, as I noted earlier, like right at the beginning of the lecture today, Eysenck tried to ground his ideas in biology. He tried to identify properties of the brain, properties of the nervous system that give rise to these personality traits. And he developed something called, it's in the slide here. No, he developed something called arousal theory to account for the differences between introverts and extroverts. All right. Let me just give you a sense of how it worked. He assumed that the brains of introverted individuals are just have innately higher levels of cortical arousal. Okay, so cortical arousal is something you can measure with an EEG. How much is the brain firing? How much are the neurons in your cortex firing at any given time? And he said, because it's more aroused in introverts, they tend to be more sensitive to stimulation. Now, that's something that you can actually test. Okay. You can bring people into the laboratory and you can say, well, I'm going to subject you to a level of stimulation, let's say a sound at X decibels. And then I want you to tell me, you, the subject, to tell me how intense that sound is or how loud you perceive that sound on a scale from 1 to 5. So you give that to an introvert, and what the subject tells you is going to be a function of two things: the objective level of the stimulus, yeah, and the amount of cortical arousal in their brain. Those two things add, and the introvert will say, "Oh, I'm giving that a 4 out of 5." You do that with the extrovert, okay, that has less cortical arousal, okay. Their psychological response is going to be a function of the same two things: the objective level of the stimulus, but that objective level of the stimulus, when it adds up with the amount of cortical arousal, is going to produce a lower number. They're going to listen and they're going to say, oh, okay, I'll give that a 2 or a 2.5. And there's not a lot of evidence showing that there are innate differences in cortical arousal, but there are, as your textbook points out, there's abundant evidence showing that introverts and extroverts differ to their sensitivity to stimulation. And he made this prediction, this kind of cool idea here, based on the idea that if you think about it, very, very low and very, very high levels of stimulation are aversive to us. Okay, so you go to even the, our heavy metal rock lovers know that at a certain point in a concert, the loudness becomes deafening. Yeah. So things that are really, really intense, or things that are really, really low, like the professor who talks like this in the lecture, and you have to strain to listen to. Okay. Also produces what he called a negative hedonic tone. When we talk about hedonics, we're talking about pleasure. We're talking about how people like things. There's a general principle that he hypothesized and has been demonstrated or validated empirically, that when you ask people for their preferred level of stimulation. It's lower for introverts than it is for extroverts. That's a really easy thing to test. I can say to you, bring your favorite playlist to my laboratory. I hook it up to my my amplifier, and then I say, set the dial at the level of loudness that you like best, that you prefer to listen to this music at. And I can record that. And when I do that for introverts and extroverts, it's always higher for extroverts. This has been done mainly with visual stimuli and auditory stimuli. One of these days has to do it with odor stimuli. Okay, you could, it's harder to do. But you could ask people, introverts and extroverts, to apply fragrance. And my guess, would be a good undergraduate thesis. My guess is that the extroverted person would apply considerably more artificial fragrance to their bodies. They would say, yeah, I like it at this intensity level, than the introverted person. I can't finish talking about him without sharing some really bad news. That this is, I guess, about 5 years old now. Broke my heart when I saw it. 13 of his papers, none of the ones that I mentioned today, none of the ones that are in your textbook, but 13 papers that he published have been retracted after he died, okay? Posthumously retracted from the literature, mostly on the topics of smoking and health, okay? So there's a new movement in psychology where, because of the replication crisis, people are really taking a much closer look at the quality of papers that have been published. And some of his got flagged. Okay, some 13 of them have been retracted. And when I looked this morning, 3 are on the review list. So they're still after him at some level. You never want to see your image in a publication like this. Any questions? I'll wrap up Isaac with that. Any thoughts? Okay, let's take 10 minutes, and then when we come back, I'll say a few things about the Big Five. The reflection exercise for this week. Please resist the temptation to go to ChatGPT. I know exactly what it spits out when you put my question into it. And I've told the TAs, if you get anything that resembles the ChatGPT response, don't give it a point. I want you to be creative and original in your reflection responses for this week. Okay, let's talk about the Big Five. We said in, I guess, last week's lecture that Gordon Allport was one of the first in a landmark study to turn to language, okay, to turn to words for insight into personality traits. All right, I think I mentioned that in a very famous study he did with Odbert, they located, and think of how hard this was to do back then, 18,000 trait descriptive adjectives in Webster's dictionary. Super cumbersome. And I want to revisit that idea now because this is how the Big Five was born. Okay, the 5-factor model of personality, which is widely accepted by many trait theorists, and it's a model that has generated a staggering amount of empirical work. So let's just think about the what guided that research endeavor. They investigate, there were two forms of inquiry, okay, language or inquiry related to language here. The first thing, Big Five researchers, when they started their investigation, looked at was what we would call synonym frequency. Okay, how many synonyms are there in a language for a particular concept? They asked that question. So think of individual differences or an individual difference variable like dominance. Okay, there are lots of terms in language to describe dominance. You want to put some in the chat now? What words can you think of that mean the same thing or more or less the same thing as dominance? Assertiveness, yeah. Commanding, loud, yes. Pushy, arrogant, forceful. There are lots of them. And the underlying logic here is that the fact that there are so many synonyms for that concept suggests or is suggestive of the fact that dominance is an important trait. Okay? That's the what's known as the synonym frequency criterion as it's described in your textbook. The other guiding assumption and underlying logic behind the Big Five and the lexical hypothesis is the idea that the more important a particular trait is in human interactions, the more languages will have a term for that trait. Okay, so we would expect to see, let's say, cross-cultural universality. If a trait is important in all cultures, if we find descriptive words for a trait in all cultures, the members of that culture will have codified terms to describe it. You would expect to find it everywhere. It's important in human nature. Now, nowadays, it's really easy to determine the frequency of words used, okay, in published work. So you can go to any of these places at the bottom of the screen. You can go to wordcount.org. This is kind of a fun thing to do. You just type a word in a box and it ranks that word, the frequency of that word usage in the British National Corpus. All right, so I did this just over dinner tonight. I put the word sauce in to word count. And in less than 5 seconds, I got information indicating that the word sauce is the 5,000th. This was bizarre. I thought 5,555th most frequently used word in the literature. You can go to Project Gutenberg. It's digitized over 100,000 books and get a word frequency rank. Best place to go, most fun place to go to do this kind of work is to this place at the bottom called Google Ngram. Okay, that's a search engine that charts word frequencies from a huge corpus of books, over 8 million books, and shows you how within cultures, within certain places, over time, the frequency of word usage changes. So there are words that used to be used with frequency when your parents were around that people aren't using anymore. New words show up to describe things. Kind of interesting side note here is that 18% of words account for 80% of word occurrences. This is actually called Zipf's law, okay, which is an interesting thing to think about. So it's super easy to find word frequencies now with our technology, but it's still trickier than you might think or might expect locating trait words. Why? Because trait words aren't always adjectives. Okay, personality traits can be conveyed through different parts of speech, including nouns, including adverbs, not just adjectives. So this is how the Big Five was derived. Okay, by assuming that variations in human personality that are important to us should be coded into our lexicon, into our language. It's not the Big Five was not at all theoretically derived. Okay, it didn't come from theory. And this strategy of looking for traits in language has been a remarkably generative starting point for identifying individual personality differences. In the past few decades, like past 3-4 decades, there's oodles of research that's converged on the idea that there exist 5 broad basic trait dimensions. Okay, the Big Five, remembered by the acronym OCEAN. Dimensions include openness, conscientiousness, agreeableness, extroversion, and neuroticism. Yes, Yasmin. Hi.
Hey, I had a question because I was reading the material and like the dependence on like the words, like the lexicon, and they were talking about the differences for different cultures and that different cultures use different descriptors.
Right.
And I was like, hold on a second. If they're saying extroversion, but they're just using different words to describe it, isn't it the same thing?
Well, okay, that's a fair question, but if they have lots of words to describe this dimension of sociability, okay, then it probably means that it's an important individual trait difference that we need to pay attention to. Now, there are all kinds of complexities here, especially when you do make a comparison between collective and individualistic cultures. Very problematic for certain trait dimensions like openness. Okay. And there's lots up for grab. But neuroticism and extroversion seem to be dimensions that replicate widely across pretty much all of the cultures that where people have studied this.
Okay,
But
so
you have translation issues. Okay, you have in order to understand the subtleties of words in different languages, it's challenging to come up with, a measurement device that asks questions using the language that's important to the people you are studying. It's a well conceived question that you have. Okay.
thank you.
But for the most part, this cross-cultural universality has been demonstrated. All of these dimensions, okay, are basic dimensions in people. They all have an emotional component, they all have a cognitive component, and they all have specific behavioral manifestations. And the way you measure the Big Five is with this instrument right here. This is the cover of the NEO-PI. Okay, it's a test booklet that was actually put together by, I'll put their names chat, by Costa and McRae. Their names are all over your textbook in the assigned chapters. It's a concise measure of the 5 major domains of personality, as well as, and I'll get to this, what they call 6 facets that define each trait. So you've got 5 domain scales, O, C, E, A, and N, and 6 facet scales. 30 facet scales altogether. It gives you information on that at the end of the day. So let me tell you a little bit about what it's like to give this to a person and what you get and what the forms actually look like. First thing to note here is that the NEO-PI is self-administered. You give it to the patient or you give it to the research subject. You say, please fill this out in a way that tells me something meaningful about you. Okay, you get self-report data from the NEO-PI. There are 2 parallel versions of it, okay, which is nice because if you want to look for changes in people, you don't have to give exactly the same instrument twice. You can you can employ the 2 parallel versions that measure the same things. Each version, like you open up this booklet, it has 240 questions. And only requires like a sixth grade reading level. All right, so it allows you to use it with a broad range of individuals. A couple of cool things about it. There is a version that's called Form S, all right, which is designed for self-reports of adults. So you just give the person the booklet, and the questions are phrased in such a way that the person just tells you something about themselves. But they also have what's called a Form R, which is designed for observer reports. Okay, it's written in the third person for peers, spouses, expert ratings. Okay, so you can give the NEO-PI to your mother and ask your mother to rate your father, okay, on a whole bunch of questions. When you look at the actual items, okay, and I'll show you some of them, you rate yourself on a 5-point scale. Okay, so there's a 5-point Likert scale that ranges from strongly disagree to strongly agree. Okay, in contrast to the EPQ, which is true or false. Now we're looking at scaled responses. So let's take a more close look at these factors. We've already described 2 of them, okay, in our discussion of Eysenck, but here are some sample items right from the NEO-PI from the neuroticism scale. You look at them, they have face validity. There's no, no secrets or manipulations here. They make sense. All right. I get stressed out easily. I get upset easily. I worry a lot. I get irritated easily. Yeah. So if you're filling this out about yourself in the S form, you put a number between 1 and 5. Okay. Again, there's a total of 240 items. Here are some sample items from the extroversion scale on the NEO-PI. I'm the life of the party. I start conversations. I like to talk to people at parties, and so on and so forth. Okay, again, no big. You look at these items. You can, if I asked you which scale do you think it comes from, you'd be able to guess with a high degree of accuracy. Let's go to one of the factors that we haven't talked about. Okay, to this one here. If the extroverted person is the let's party person, then the agreeable person is the let's all get along person. Okay, agreeableness describes the ability to get along with other people, to promote cooperation, to promote social harmony. They care about the group. So right now in my Psychology 4180 course, the critical thinking course, the big assignment in that course is a debate project. Yeah, so you put students together in groups and you ask them in at the end of the term to prepare to debate on big controversial topics in psychology. So they have to do a lot of research. They have to get a PowerPoint presentation together. They have to get a script together. It's a significant amount of work, which it should be because it's a thesis level course. So right now, at this point in the term, I'm meeting the debate groups. Okay, I'm helping them. I have consultations with them. And when you meet with 5 students at a time, okay, most of the time I can tell in the first consultation, if not the first, certainly in the second consultation, who the agreeable students are. They're the ones who keep it all together. Okay, they're the ones that set up the Google document that everybody contributes to. They're the one. They're the people who often delegate tasks. Okay, they're the ones who tolerate the freeloaders in the group. I don't know if you've done any courses where you had to do group projects, but group projects in university can be fantastic experiences or they can be horrible experiences. And they're often horrible experiences when you're working with people who do not pull their weight. Okay. Yes. I can see that some of you have. The agreeable person picks up the slack because they are interested in promoting the greater good for the group. They're people who are more likely to withdraw from conflict. Okay. They're empathic. So the other day I got a message from one of the students in the class who asked me to be kindly disposed to a student in her group because the student was suffering from these kinds of or experiencing certain issues. They really care about other people. They are people who are willing to compromise, okay, to sacrifice their own needs and interests in service of getting along with other people. Agreeable people see other people as basically decent, honest, trustworthy. Okay, so you think of everything that I've said to describe the agreeable person. There are obviously advantages to being that person. What are those advantages? What's the upside to being an agreeable person?
Everyone will like you and they will probably help you.
Well, everyone will like you. Okay, there's no question about that. It's great for attaining popularity, it's great for maintaining popularity. We like aggressive people. Somebody sent me a short video of Sharon Stone the other day. Sharon Stone, the great actress, she's probably in her 60s now, reflecting on her career. And she says something like, it took her way too long to figure out that doing things to please people came with a huge cost. She was talking about it in the context of her career, but also in the context of her mental well-being. She said it wasn't until she learned how to say no and to set boundaries that she became a free artist in the truest sense. Okay, so it really was. I'll see if I can find it and maybe I'll post it. It really was a commentary on the advantages and disadvantages of agreeableness. If you're super agreeable, people are going to like you, and agreeable people are better liked by others than disagreeable people. In our culture, okay, we hold agreeableness in esteem. We pathologize really disagreeable people. Okay, so we associate it with a virtue, but of course, all virtues turn into vices at certain levels. The upside is social harmony and being liked. What's the downside to being an agreeable person? Yes, Mia, exactly. You're much more likely to get pushed around. You're much more likely to forfeit what you want for the sake of cooperation. When you compare, I'm going to go out there with this and use the terms. When you compare biological males and females on agreeableness, do you think you find differences? What would you suspect? Yes, 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 absolutely. Higher in females. Not only higher in females, much higher in females, like on the order of a half a standard deviation, which might also explain the negative correlation between agreeableness and salary. Okay? You'll make less money as a super agreeable person. Why? Because you won't ask on behalf of yourself for more. All right, so there's a plus and a minus side to this personality dimension, and these are some of the items from the scale. Conscientiousness, hallmark attribute of the conscientious person, or attributes are industriousness, okay, and orderliness. These are the people who are driven, they're hardworking, they're reliable, they're striving. I'm guessing that if I gave the NeoPI to everybody in this classroom, that you would all score pretty high on conscientiousness. Because I know that you couldn't survive very long as successful undergraduates without being in possession of these abilities. If you were not, that's funny, Mia. If you were not high on achievement motivation, then you probably wouldn't even want to be here. Okay, if you didn't have a plan to persevere, if you didn't have a plan to achieve some sort of long-term goal, you wouldn't be able to hang out in the university for very long. So it's a tendency to display things like self-discipline, to act dutifully, to strive for achievement. Emotionally, it's related to the ways in which people regulate and direct their impulses. Okay, conscientious people, and this is nicely outlined in your textbook, enjoy a host of positive life outcomes. They make better students. They have higher job satisfaction. So when you check in with people in their 20s and 30s and ask them, okay, now that you've finished all of your education, how much are you intrinsically enjoying what you do? Conscientious people say they're happier, okay? They're more satisfied with their jobs than non-conscientious people. They tend to be healthier. They tend to be in better shape, okay? Which makes sense because they stick to a plan. Okay, the conscientious person is not the person who buys the gym membership on January the 1st and then is nowhere to be seen by January the 20th. They indicate preferences for planned activities rather than spontaneous activities. And they also enjoy better and more positive committed relationships. Okay, so conscientiousness is a great predictor of things like financial success, grades, income, social status, work performance, like in managerial positions. And it's negatively correlated with divorce. Okay, interestingly. So you look at that and you think, well, who wouldn't want to be this person? That all sounds good. But what's the downside to being a super highly conscientious person? Rigidity, yeah. What else? Uptight, meaning, Taryn, what are you thinking of here? Little social life, inflexibility, that goes along with rigidity, overly goal oriented. Yeah. And these are the people who can't handle it when there's nothing to do. Like these are not the people you can take to on a beach vacation, okay, or a spa vacation. They're uncomfortable in those situations. There's a significant drop in their psychological well-being when they're forced when they retire. And I can tell you from personal experience that there's no better place to watch that than the university, or there has been no better place to watch that than the university. Until very recently, okay, just a few years ago, universities retired professors at age 65. And I remember watching senior scholars here at York. There were really two groups of them. Okay, there were really only two groups of them. There was group one who would they'd go, sometimes they'd leave early, like before they were 65. They'd clean their offices out. They might send you a postcard from an exotic location with a snarky comment like having a wonderful time in Bora Bora, so happy to be away from York. Okay, like they were just having the time of their lives. And then there were other senior scholars, and this was heartbreaking to watch, many of whom were doing their best work, many of whom were in their most productive phase of scholarship, still managing graduate students and supervising, taking on responsibilities in the department. They clung on, okay, by their fingernails. And the university would do terrible things to them, okay? Take away their secretaries, take away the support staff, they take away their offices. All right, so we had these amazing scholars at one point in the behavioral science building who were all shoved in these tiny little broom closets in the basement of the BSB. They would not go because so much of their identity was about producing, okay, and doing what they did for a living, that not doing it, not working, seemed unimaginable to them. You'll read in your textbooks that there are developmental shifts in conscientiousness. Okay, so it rises in young adults and then it tapers off in older adults. Okay, predictive of a lot of things. And then finally, there's this last dimension, maybe a controversial trait, maybe difficult to grasp. I know I have difficulty grasping it when I think about it longer than 5 minutes. What's called openness to experience. We usually regard artists as the exemplars of openness, yeah? And this trait and the measurement of this trait has been useful in understanding certainly the creative process and the artistic temperament. No question about that. So the high open person is someone who can grasp novel ideas and someone who likes to think about novel ideas. They're people whose interests extend across a variety of domains. And think about that now in the place that you and I live in. We live in this place called the university. Yeah, it's got a high percentage of smart people here. As faculty, as students, okay, as young people. But I think you would agree that not all of them are open. If you took the time to get to know your professors, you would see that many of them have very highly developed interests in super specialized fields. Some of them are maybe leaders in their area of scholarship. But many of them are happy to stay in their lane. Okay, they do what they do. They don't communicate with people outside of their silo. They don't venture out, and many of them don't have a wide range of interests. We don't kind of make Renaissance scholars anymore, which is why when you encounter one, it's a beautiful thing. Has anybody here ever taken a course with Frank Marchese? Taken the motivation course or the personality course with well, I guess not personality, but the motivation course with Frank? No? Treat yourself, okay, in the next couple of years to a course with Dr. Marchese. Okay, Jessica, right. Impressions of him? Not a unidimensional person. Would you agree?
I agree. Yeah. I really did enjoy
Okay.
it. People
He's
who
a
are-
he's a well-known art collector. You can have a conversation with him about visual arts for days and days and days. He's a published poet. Okay, he has an incredible range of interest and expertise. Okay, you don't encounter that in academic settings these days in the same way that you used to. Okay, Frank is what I'm sure if we gave Frank the O scale from the Neo PI, he would score high on openness. Some people in this discussion is in your book have argued that we can use the term intellect, all right, which is the ability to learn and reason and the capacity for knowledge and understanding as an alternative label to openness. And at some level, that has face value, yeah. The interest that an open person has in a wide range of experiences could be seen as a result of intellectual properties. Okay, being able to having a facility for handling information and certain kinds of intellectual experiences. And it's true that openness does correlate with some types of intelligence measures, but it's a lot more than that. Okay, it's much more than a cognitive dimension. Cognitive abilities can facilitate exploration in a person, but they're not necessary or even sufficient. Open people have a need for variety. Okay, so think about your preferred activities or your preferred aesthetic experiences. Maybe you like to listen to the symphony, for example, or read classical literature. That has zero practical value to you. And if you ask yourself, why do I do that on my spare time? The answer has nothing to do with your major tasks or goals at the moment, but you do it because they expand your experience. They enlarge your experience. That's the quintessential aim of the open person, to enlarge their experience. So people who score high on O are imaginative, they're creative, they're original, they prefer a variety, and they're curious. Okay, they're in possession of this thing that we call curiosity. Little fun fact at the bottom of the slide here that just came to my attention not too long ago is One dose of psilocybin, okay, these are the things people get money to research, can result in long-lasting changes in your openness. So you give people the neo-PI before they take psilocybin. Then you give them psilocybin. Then you give them the neo-PI afterwards, and then 6 months down the road, and then a year down the road, and it seems to influence change in their responses to the O scale. You'll read in the text that there's lots of uncertainty about the content of the items, about the naming of the trait here, about the replicability of this factor. Okay, it's the hardest factor to replicate cross-culturally. So you might be thinking now that 5 factors is kind of interesting, but too few, okay? Too few factors to capture the fascinating complexity of your personality. And you might be right, okay? There's also something deeply upsetting to us. It offends our sensibility when people reduce us to a particular type or trait. We've all had that experience where we felt diminished or minimized because someone used a trait categorization to describe us. Oh, don't ask her to help. She's not a team player. Don't ask her to complete the task. She never gets things done on time. The neo-PI 5 has, as a consequence to some of these, or as a reaction to some of these criticisms, included these facet scales that are nicely described in your book. But having the facet data there allows you to pick up more subtle and nuanced information about the person, okay, on those 5 dimensions. So each trait has 6 facets that provide you with, let's say, greater richness and complexity in personality description. That's the big 5. Does it provide us with a comprehensive description of personality? That's still up for grabs. Some people have argued that this is the most robust classification system in town. They argue that these 5 factors have proven to be highly replicable across researchers, across samples, across cultures, across languages, across item formats. Okay, it has a lot of empirical evidence backing it up. But you'll read in your textbook that there are critics, that there's some people think that a 6th factor, there's been a suggestion that a 6th factor is important. There are people who argue that, with all of the empirical evidence to support the 5-factor model, it doesn't tell us anything about personality process. Okay, saying someone is neurotic doesn't give you an explanation of their behavior. Remember Skinner's criticism last week that we can't, and warning that we have to be mindful to not confuse description with explanation. Okay, saying someone is neurotic doesn't tell us why they worry the way they do. So I would say to you, the big issues in trait psychology now are in a lot of ways the same as they always have been. Okay? We're still asking the question, well, what really is the best way to conceptualize traits? Which traits are the most important traits? And how do you formulate a comprehensive and meaningful taxonomy or categorization of traits. What does seem clear, though, okay, when you look at the literature, is that most life outcomes, and I've just given you some sample data here, most life outcomes are better predicted by a combination of traits rather than a single trait. Okay, so if you're in the business of picking effective leaders for a business or trying to solicit volunteers, okay, that's also big business, then they're predicted by best predicted by having knowledge of more than one trait in another person. I'll leave you time. You can look at these on your own later. And I'll close here by showing you this from the Toronto Star. Sometimes you can actually predict where people live on the basis of knowledge of their traits. So this was a mapping exercise that was conducted by the Rotman Business School at the University of Toronto, and they split the city of Toronto into these different neighborhoods and went in and gave people in households the NEO-PI. And you see pretty clear differences. I can give you, well, you can go to the link on your own. I have it at the bottom of the screen here. The people who live in different neighborhoods have higher concentrations, looking at this at the top here, of open people compared to other neighborhoods. The people east of Yonge are the worriers, the neurotics. People west of Yonge are the chill folks. Scarborough, you find the considerate folks. You find the open folks. In the annex, of course, okay, Spadina and Bloor, St. George and Bloor over to Christie. This has actually been done throughout the entire U.S. Okay, where this map shows you the concentration for the five measures across the 50 states. So very, very widely researched model that's been applied in some super interesting ways. Do we know if there's a score yet? Nobody? Okay, I think I'll let you go. Hang on a second, Casey Joe. I think our surroundings can influence us. Yes, depends on how much we want to assimilate. Yeah, and people are an excellent point. And people who are drawn to certain neighborhoods, presumably because they sense that the community there are like-minded. 2-1 for us or them, Casey? Just tell me. Oh, yay. Okay. All right, folks. I'll let everybody go. Have a great remainder of the week and go Blue Jays. Catch you later.